All right, so there's no end in sight to the war with Iran. And in light of that, we're going to ask what the Secretary of Defense was doing in Iowa. Pete Hegseth was at the Iowa State Fair yesterday, stumping for Republican Congressman Zach Nunn. The Pentagon says Hegseth was there in his, quote, personal capacity. The Washington Post cites officials familiar with the defense secretary's thinking who say they believe that he is considering a run for president or some other political office after his time in the Trump administration is over. Molly, John, and the general are still with us. Do you have any past examples of a defense secretary going on a campaign swing in the middle of a war, General?
I don't, Katie. And I'd say one other thing, that there isn't a whole lot of personal capacity in anybody that works in the Defense Department. That's both military and civilian leaders. They are there 24/7 because it's a big world and we have forces all around the globe. So when you're saying you're going to take time off for a personal run or say, hey, I'm here in my personal capacity, let's just take Iowa. There are soldiers from Iowa that are both of the Republican, Democratic, and independent persuasion. When they see their Defense Department leader hawking for one particular candidate, and they know that he might come up to them the next day and say, "Who are you voting for?" Well, if you're voting for the Democrat after he's just talked for the Republican, how is that going to affect the potential for you to influence him in the kinds of things the members of the military do? It seems unusual because the job of the defense secretary, as I wrote, it seems like 10 years ago, but it was probably right before Secretary Hegseth was confirmed, is probably the third most difficult one in government because they run a very large business. They are seen by 2.5 million people as an example for those in the Department of Defense. They have acquisition requirements, leadership requirements, travel requirements, requirements to build alliances, requirements to see how combatant commanders are conducting preparations for warfare, and about 50 other things. So I'm not sure that a defense secretary can take time off and call it personal time to go do something like this.
All defense secretaries are politically appointed. Do you think that there's a difference in the way that any soldier might approach them? I mean, if you are serving under any separate president, Republican, Democrat, do you not have the same issues with troops, that if troops want to vote for a Republican or vote for a Democrat and you're not, among that administration, is there a concern that they can't be forthright, as you were trying to say with Hegseth?
I would say yes, absolutely. It's the same thing with me or any other commander in the military. You can't show your political stripes. I mean, during the entire time I was in the military, I never once voted for a president. And that's an example that George Marshall gave in World War II, because he said, I can't afford to vote for someone because I can't show which side of the aisle I want to be on. So he treated all presidents the same, and that's what we should do in the military. So when you have a civilian leader of the military that is obviously showing his stripes in terms of which side he falls on, like I said a minute ago, there are going to be a percentage of the military that says, hey, that's not my side. How come my boss, the Secretary of Defense, is having this partisan divide that's contrary to what we all sign up to do, which is to be nonpartisan and defend our country, whether it's a right-wing or a left-wing citizen that we're defending, because they come from all walks of life in the country.
There have been a lot of Trump administration officials that have been out in Iowa recently, and a lot of them are there to boost up Sam Nunn and some other Republicans in Iowa who are, I guess, having a harder time than would normally be expected against the Democrats this round. Is that true?
Yes. I've spent a decent amount of time in Iowa, and here's an interesting dynamic of the state. It was a swing state for a very long time.
I mean, Zach Nunn. God, I said Sam Nunn. That shows you how far I go
go back to Georgia. But here's the bottom line on Iowa. It was a swing state. Not that long ago, had a Democratic governor, had Harkin in the Senate for a long time. It splits its votes. Trump succeeded in 2016 for some of the reasons we've been talking about here in making a connection in Iowa that did transform a lot of the politics there, but it didn't lock in. There is now a great deal of evidence that in the governor's race, Rob Sand has a very good chance of winning. The Senate race is very, very close. There are 3 congressional seats that are very much in play there, and it's a fascinating reality. The Iowa Democrats have their own style. They tend to be, a lot of town meetings out there with folks. The Republicans are, I think, doing almost exactly the wrong thing for trying to win the state. Sending in folks from Washington is not the way to do it. Sending in, having local folks.
Just because this Republican Party believes that it is all a top-down message? That it's all about Donald Trump, and what they need is to just put everybody that has to do with Donald Trump, the closest allies, out in front of these voters and remind them that they have to get back on Team Trump. Is that the strategy?
I think they may be, but it's not the right strategy. Trump himself did have an appeal. He could draw a crowd. But this is one thing to remember about this. They aren't just going out to remind people, of Trump. They're also going out because they know that Trump is in his second term, and some of them would like to be considered as presidential candidates. Yeah. And
there's a flirtation there.
There's nothing worse than trying to sell your own presidential campaign at a time when your party's trying to stay above water.
Yeah. But I also think, look, I mean, we were talking about Turek and Sand, and I interviewed both of them, and what they say and what Rob Sand says is he's a prairie populist, right? That this is not left versus right, it's up versus down. So they are taking a very kind of nonpartisan, independent-y way through, even though they're running as Ds. So the question is, and even like Sands brags about having gotten more money from Republicans and Democrats. So they're running as very nonpartisan Democrats. And they're coming up against a Fox News weekend host who is supposed to be running a very unpopular war. And the stuff he says on the stump is very partisan, and it's very kind of harsh. And it has a lot, it's a lot of the very sort of Trumpy kind of stuff about, low T.
Why would it not work? I mean, Republicans have won Iowa now since Donald Trump has come back on the scene. They've dominated Iowa.
They won Iowa twice with Barack Obama, too. And so remember that it's a swing state.
And also, Obama did the Turek ad, right, where he comes in and he says, Iowa is so special to me. Iowa's the best thing I ever did in politics. And that kind of stuff works in a state, in a small state. But the other thing about Iowa, which I think is unique to Iowa and is something Sands had said to me and Turek too, they have a really bad cancer problem. It's the state with the second highest rate of cancer in America because of groundwater and because of pollution in the groundwater from farming agra. And they feel in some ways that they have not been taken care of by Republican administration. So that's going to.
They've also got a really bad tariff problem.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Just to add that to the mix.
Hegseth, is he really flirting with the idea of running for president?
I think you go to Iowa.
You only go to Iowa for one reason.
No, Iowa's a great state. You go there for a lot of reasons. Let me tell you. The fair is fantastic. But this is what I will say. Has anybody mentioned J.D. Vance recently?
No.
Seems to be a little off radar. And so when you have an administration come into its later days,
he could just be trying to weather this storm and not come out too damaged by it. We'll see. I got one other question for you, General, before we wrap this up. 2 of the killed in action soldiers were from Iowa in this war in Iran. I don't know what the defense secretary's schedule was. I don't know if he had meetings with the families while he was in Iowa. Would you expect that he would have done that or should have done that?
I would think so, yeah, Katie. The thing that you were just talking about, I don't know much about politics, but I will chime in and say there are going to be people coming up to Secretary Hegseth in Iowa City saying, hey, you're the best thing ever. I love your tough talk. It's wonderful. You're the best Secretary of Defense we've ever had. And then there are going to be some people coming up to him whose sons or daughters are in the military also, and who are going to say, what the hell are you doing here? There's a war on. We've got morale problems. Get back to Washington or get over to the Abe Lincoln and see what's going on. So that's another part of the tearing of having a civilian leader in the Defense Department going to run. So yeah, to answer your first question, he most certainly should be looking at, but I'm not sure their prep for the Secretary of Defense going to a specific area includes something like that when he's basically stumping for someone else.